The Grandview Hotel had been empty for 20 years, its broken windows staring like dead eyes across the highway. Sarah Chen pulled her battered Honda into the gravel lot as lightning split the sky, her 8-month belly pressed against the steering wheel. She'd been driving for hours, fleeing the fight that shattered her marriage when the storm forced her to take shelter. The front desk still held an old guest registry, its pages yellowed and forgotten. Sarah flipped through it absently, seeking distraction from her crumbling world. Then she saw it, her husband David's signature, dated 3 months ago. But that was impossible. He'd told her he was in Seattle on business. She turned the page. Another signature. Same handwriting. Different woman's name listed as his wife. Then another, and another. 5 different wives across 10 years, all registered at this same forgotten hotel. Sarah's blood turned to ice as footsteps echoed in the lobby behind her. The man she'd loved, trusted, and built a life with wasn't who she thought he was. But the question that would haunt her forever was this: what happened to all those other wives? The footsteps stopped. Sarah's fingers trembled as she gripped the registry, her mind reeling through the implications. David Miller with Rebecca Torres, 2014. David Morrison with Lisa Yang, 2016. David Matthews with Carmen Rodriguez, 2019. Always different last names, always different women, but that distinctive handwriting, the way he looped his D's, the sharp angle of his M's, was unmistakably his. Thunder crashed overhead, masking the sound of her ragged breathing. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her terror. She forced herself to remain perfectly still, praying whoever had entered would leave. Rain hammered against the rotting window frames, and the ancient building groaned under the storm's assault. "Hello!" a voice called out. Male, but not David's. Relief flooded through her until she realized this might be worse. Who else would be here, in this forgotten place, at nearly midnight during a storm? Sarah slowly closed the registry and slipped it under her coat. She needed to get out, but her car keys were still clutched in her shaking hand, and any movement might give her away. The lobby's shadows provided some cover, but not enough if someone came looking. "I saw the car outside," the voice continued, closer now. "Place isn't safe in this weather. Roof's been leaking for years." Something in his tone suggested genuine concern, but Sarah had learned not to trust her instincts about men. After all, she'd shared a bed with a stranger for 3 years without knowing it. She'd felt his hands on her growing belly, listened to him whisper promises about their future, believed every lie that fell from his lips. A flashlight beam swept across the lobby, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah pressed herself against the wall behind the reception desk, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The beam passed inches from her hiding spot. "Miss, if you're in here, you should know this place has structural damage. That storm's only getting worse." The man's voice held a slight southern accent, nothing like David's clipped northeastern pronunciation. Sarah weighed her options: stay hidden and risk the building collapsing, or reveal herself to a stranger in the middle of nowhere. Neither choice offered safety. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah bit back a gasp. Through the broken windows she could see tree branches whipping violently in the wind. Even if she made it to her car, driving in this storm would be suicide. But staying here might be worse. She thought about the registry hidden under her coat. 5 wives over 10 years. Had David brought them all here? Was this some kind of hunting ground, a place where he could dispose of inconvenient women? The isolated location would be perfect. No witnesses, no cameras, no cell phone signal. Her phone. Sarah slowly pulled it from her pocket, praying for even 1 bar of service. Nothing. The screen showed only the emergency call option, but even that seemed futile in this remote location. "Look, I'm not going anywhere," the man called out. Storm knocked a tree across the road about half a mile back. "We're both stuck here until morning, so we might as well make the best of it." The flashlight beam moved away, exploring the far side of the lobby. Sarah heard him testing floorboards, his footsteps heavy but careful. If he was telling the truth about the road being blocked, she was trapped. But if he was lying, she forced herself to think clearly despite the panic clawing at her chest. The registry proved David had been using this place for years, bringing different women here under different identities. But she'd never seen any news reports about missing women, no Amber Alerts or police investigations. Either he was very good at covering his tracks, or the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. But Sarah knew she had to face the truth. She might be carrying the child of a serial killer. The storm's fury seemed to intensify as Sarah stepped deeper into the hotel's shadowy interior, her wet shoes squelching against warped floorboards. Lightning illuminated peeling wallpaper and cobwebs that hung like funeral shrouds from the ornate chandelier overhead. The air tasted of mold and secrets, making her stomach churn beyond what pregnancy alone could explain. She pulled out her phone, hoping for a signal, but the screen showed only empty bars. The storm had knocked out the cell towers, leaving her truly isolated in this decaying monument to better times. Thunder rolled overhead like God's bowling ball, and she instinctively placed a protective hand over her belly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "We'll just wait it out." The lobby stretched before her, dominated by a mahogany reception desk that had seen better decades. Behind it, pigeonhole mailboxes climbed the wall like a honeycomb, many hanging open with their brass keys still dangling. Sarah approached the desk, running her fingers along its water-stained surface, and discovered a leather-bound guest registry beneath a layer of dust. Curiosity overcame caution. She opened the heavy book, its spine cracking with protest. The pages were yellowed but surprisingly well preserved, filled with elegant handwriting that spoke of an era when hotels kept meticulous records. She flipped through entries from the 1980s and 90s, reading names and addresses of guests who had long since checked out of life itself. Then she saw it. Her heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity before hammering against her ribs. There, in familiar handwriting, was David's signature. Her David, her missing husband whose disappearance had consumed her thoughts for 3 weeks. But the name wasn't David Chen. It was David Morrison, and beside it, in flowing script, was written Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, Honeymoon Suite. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the page. There it was again, 6 months later. David Morrison and wife. Then again, a year after that. Different wives each time, based on the varying handwriting in the additional guests column. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself to keep reading. David Chen appeared twice, with different women whose names weren't Sarah. David Patterson showed up 4 times. David Williams, David Thompson. Always a new wife, always the honeymoon suite, spanning nearly 15 years. The registry slipped from her numb fingers and hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. She stumbled backward, her mind reeling. The man she'd married 8 months ago, the man whose child grew inside her, was a phantom, a creature of shifting identities who collected wives like some twisted hobby. A door slammed somewhere in the hotel's depths. Sarah froze, every muscle tensing. The sound came again, followed by footsteps echoing through the corridors above. Heavy boots on wooden floors, moving with purpose rather than the random settling of an old building. She wasn't alone. Panic flooded her system as she grabbed the registry and clutched it to her chest. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a voice she recognized despite the months of searching, despite the lies, despite everything. "Sarah, I know you're here. I saw your car." David's voice carried through the gloom, warm and familiar and absolutely terrifying. He was supposed to be missing. He was supposed to be the victim of some terrible accident or crime. Not here, in this place where his multiple identities were documented like inventory. She pressed herself against the wall behind the reception desk, grateful for the shadows. Through a gap in the wooden panels, she could see the grand staircase where a figure was descending. Even in the dim light, she recognized his silhouette. The man she'd shared a bed with, planned a future with, created a child with. "I know this is confusing," he continued, his tone maddeningly calm. "But we can talk about it. You and the baby don't have to be afraid." The baby. How did he know about the baby? She'd only confirmed the pregnancy 2 weeks after he'd vanished, unless he'd never really left, unless he'd been watching, waiting, planning. Sarah's breathing came in short, sharp gasps. She pressed her free hand over her mouth to muffle the sound, tasting salt from tears she didn't remember shedding. The registry felt heavy in her arms, its leather binding slick with her perspiration. "I saw the registry too the first time I came here," David said, and she could tell he was in the lobby now, only yards away. "It's quite a collection, isn't it? My life's work, you might say." His footsteps circled the lobby like a predator stalking prey. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed to whatever gods protected pregnant women and fools who trusted the wrong men. The storm raged outside, but the real tempest was here, in this room, wearing her husband's face and speaking in his voice about wives collected like trophies. She had to run. She had to survive, for both of them. The leather-bound registry trembled in Sarah's hands as she flipped through pages that chronicled a nightmare. Each entry was written in David's meticulous handwriting, the same careful script she'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards. But these weren't mundane reminders or loving messages. They were methodical records of deception. Michelle Garrett, 28, Portland. Married 6 months. Pregnancy confirmed week 20. Final arrangements made September 2020. Lisa Chen, 31, Seattle. Married 4 months. Pregnancy confirmed week 18. Final arrangements made March 2022. Rebecca Torres, 29, Sacramento. Married 8 months. Pregnancy confirmed week 16. Final arrangements made. The clinical language made her stomach lurch. Final arrangements. The phrase appeared after every entry, always coinciding with the pregnancy confirmations. Sarah's vision blurred as she counted 17 names, 17 women, 17 sets of final arrangements. Thunder crashed overhead, but it seemed distant compared to the roaring in her ears. Her own name wasn't in the registry yet, but a loose piece of paper tucked between the pages made her blood freeze. Sarah Mitchell, 26, Denver. Married 18 months. Pregnancy confirmed week 19. The entry was incomplete, no mention of final arrangements yet, but given the pattern, she knew what came next. Sarah's legs gave out and she sank onto the dusty floorboards, the registry still clutched against her chest. The baby kicked, a flutter of movement that felt suddenly precious and terrifyingly vulnerable. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering, "I won't let him hurt you." The sound of a car engine outside sent panic shooting through her nervous system. Headlights swept across the broken windows, casting moving shadows on the walls. Sarah scrambled to her feet, stuffing the registry into her jacket. She had to get out, had to. The front door creaked open downstairs. "Sarah?" David's voice echoed through the empty hotel, concerned and loving, the same tone he'd used when asking about her day or suggesting baby names. "Sarah, are you here? Your car's outside." She pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. How had he found her so quickly? The storm was still raging. He shouldn't have been able to drive in this weather unless he'd known exactly where to look. Unless he'd planned for this. "I know you're scared, sweetheart." His voice was closer now, somewhere near the lobby. "The storm knocked down some power lines. I was worried sick when I got home and found you gone." Sarah bit her lip to keep from crying out. Every word sounded genuine, filled with the concern of a devoted husband. But she'd just read the evidence of his true nature, written in his own hand. How many other women had heard these same reassurances before they died? Footsteps echoed on the wooden stairs. He was coming up. Sarah looked around desperately. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors to guest rooms that likely led nowhere. The window at the far end might offer escape, but it was 3 stories down, and she was 8 months pregnant. "The road's getting worse," David continued conversationally as his footsteps grew closer. "We need to get you somewhere safe before the flooding starts. The baby's health is what matters most." The baby's health. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, remembering the pattern in the registry. Every woman had been pregnant when she disappeared. Every woman had carried his child. A door creaked open somewhere down the hall, then another. He was checking rooms methodically. Sarah forced herself to move, creeping toward the back stairway she'd noticed earlier. Her feet felt clumsy and foreign, her pregnant body unwieldy as she tried to move silently across the rotting floorboards. Each step seemed to echo like a gunshot in her ears. "Sarah, I found your flashlight." David's voice was patient, almost amused. "You must be so frightened in the dark. Let me help you." She reached the stairway and gripped the banister, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. The wood groaned ominously but held. Behind her, David's systematic search continued. "I know what you must be thinking," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the empty hotel. "Finding this place all run down and abandoned, it must seem scary, but sometimes old places keep secrets that are better left buried." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Somehow he knew she'd found the registry. "The thing is, sweetheart, once you know certain secrets, it becomes very difficult to unknow them. And that puts us both in a complicated position." She reached the second-floor landing and paused, listening. His footsteps had stopped. The silence stretched out, broken only by the storm's fury outside. Then she heard it, footsteps on the back stairs below her, moving upward with the same methodical patience. He'd anticipated her escape route. Sarah looked around frantically. She was trapped between floors, with David approaching from below and nowhere left to run. The registry pressed against her ribs like a guilty secret, evidence that could save other women if she could just survive long enough to share it. The registry fell from Sarah's trembling hands, pages scattering across the dusty floor like accusations. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the photographs of women who could have been her sisters, all blonde, all young, all wearing the same trusting smile she'd worn on her wedding day. She pressed her back against the wall, fighting the wave of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. The storm outside seemed distant now, a mere whisper compared to the chaos in her mind. How many times had David told her she was special? How many times had he said those exact words to the others? A floorboard creaked somewhere in the hotel. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound came again, deliberate, measured footsteps from the floor above. She wasn't alone. Moving as quietly as her pregnant body would allow, she crept to the window and peered through a gap in the boards. Her Honda sat where she'd left it, rain streaming down its windows. But parked behind it, barely visible through the storm, was another vehicle. A dark SUV she hadn't noticed before. The footsteps moved across the ceiling, heading toward what she guessed was the staircase. Sarah's mind raced through her options. The front entrance was too far, too exposed. She remembered seeing a service door near the kitchen when she'd first entered. She gathered as many registry pages as she could, stuffing them into her jacket pocket as evidence. Her phone still showed no signal, but she kept it ready. If she could reach her car, drive far enough from this dead zone, she could call for help. The footsteps reached the stairs. Sarah slipped out of the office and into the main lobby, keeping low behind the reception desk. The ancient wood groaned under her weight, and she held her breath, waiting. The footsteps paused, then continued down. Through the shadows, she could make out a figure at the bottom of the staircase, tall, wearing a dark coat, face obscured by the gloom. The figure stood motionless for a long moment, as if listening, then began moving through the lobby with practiced familiarity. This wasn't someone who had stumbled upon the hotel by accident. Sarah crawled along behind the desk, her knees scraping against debris. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. Whatever was happening here, whoever was in the hotel with her, she had to think of her child first. The figure moved toward the office she'd just left. In seconds, they would discover the scattered registry pages, would know someone had been there. She had to move now. She made her way to the hallway leading to the kitchen, staying in the shadows cast by the weak light filtering through the boarded windows. Behind her, she heard the office door creak open. The kitchen was a maze of overturned tables and rusted equipment. She could see the service door at the far end, but it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Her only hope was that it wasn't locked from the outside. A shout echoed from the office. They'd found the registry. Sarah abandoned stealth for speed, pushing through the kitchen obstacles as fast as her condition allowed. She reached the service door and yanked on the handle. It didn't budge. She tried again, putting her full weight behind it, and felt it give slightly. The wood was swollen from years of moisture, but it wasn't locked. Footsteps pounded through the lobby, heading her way. With a final desperate pull, the door burst open, sending her stumbling into the rain. The storm hit her like a physical blow, instantly soaking through her clothes. She could barely see her car through the downpour, but she ran toward it, her feet slipping on the muddy ground. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking from cold and terror. The car door handle was slick with rain, and she nearly dropped the keys twice before managing to unlock it. As she threw herself into the driver's seat, she saw the service door burst open behind her. The figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, and for one heart-stopping moment, she thought she recognized the build, the stance, but it couldn't be. David was in Chicago. David was at a conference. David had kissed her goodbye and promised to call when he landed. She gunned the engine and reversed blindly, not caring about the scratches from the overgrown bushes. Her headlights swept across the hotel as she spun the wheel, and she caught a glimpse of the figure running toward the dark SUV. Sarah floored the accelerator, her tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. The car lurched forward down the narrow access road, branches scraping against the windows. In her rearview mirror, she saw headlights flare to life. She was being followed. The winding road was treacherous in the storm, but she didn't slow down. Every few seconds, she checked the mirror, watching the pursuing headlights grow larger. Her phone remained stubbornly silent, no signal, no way to call for help. She was on her own, racing through a nightmare with her unborn child and a terrible truth about the man she'd married. The leather-bound registry felt heavy in Sarah's trembling hands as she carried it to the lobby's front desk, where a shaft of lightning illuminated the ornate brass lamp. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened the book again, praying she had misread the entries in the darkness of the office. But there it was, clear as day in the flickering light, David Chen and Margaret Flores, room 237, August 15th. Below that, in the same careful handwriting, David Chen and Linda Walsh, room 312, September 22nd. And 3 entries down, and David Chen and Rebecca Torres, room 156, October 8th. Each entry included checkout dates that never came. Instead, there were small red X marks next to each woman's name, made in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. Sarah's vision blurred as she flipped through more pages. David's name appeared dozens of times over the past 5 years, always with different women, always followed by those ominous red marks. Her own entry was at the very bottom of the current page, and David Chen and Sarah Mitchell, room 203, November 3rd. No checkout date yet, no red mark, yet. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her terror. Sarah pressed her hand to her belly, trying to steady her breathing. She had to think clearly. David wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow morning, which gave her maybe 10 hours to figure out what to do. But first she needed to understand what had happened to those other women. Room 237 was on the floor above hers. Sarah grabbed the flashlight from behind the desk and headed for the grand staircase, each step creaking ominously under her weight. The second-floor hallway stretched endlessly before her, wallpaper peeling in long strips that looked like skeletal fingers in the dancing shadows. Room 237's door stood slightly ajar. Sarah pushed it open with the tip of the flashlight, afraid to touch anything with her bare hands. The smell hit her immediately, something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Her flashlight beam swept across an unmade bed, clothes scattered on the floor, and a suitcase still sitting open on the dresser. On the nightstand lay a driver's license, Margaret Flores, age 29, from Austin, Texas. Her bright smile in the photo made Sarah's stomach lurch. Beside the license was a pregnancy test showing 2 pink lines. Sarah backed out of the room, bile rising in her throat. She forced herself to check room 312. Linda Walsh had been from Denver, also pregnant according to the ultrasound photos scattered across her dresser. Room 156 revealed Rebecca Torres from Phoenix, her purse still containing prenatal vitamins and a baby name book bookmarked on girl names. All pregnant, all young, all dead, if those red marks meant what Sarah feared they did. Her phone buzzed with a text message, making her jump so violently she nearly dropped the flashlight. The screen showed David's name and a simple message: change of plans. Coming tonight. Can't wait to see you, darling. The timestamp showed the message had been sent 20 minutes ago. Sarah's blood turned to ice. If David had been driving when he sent that, he could be here within the hour. She had to get out, but the storm was still raging outside, and her car keys were in their room. More importantly, she needed evidence. The police would never believe her story without proof, and David was charming enough to talk his way out of almost anything. She raced back downstairs to the office and grabbed the registry, shoving it into her jacket. Then she remembered the filing cabinets. If David had been using this place for years, there had to be more evidence. The bottom drawer of the first cabinet was locked, but Sarah found a letter opener on the desk and managed to pry it open. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with a woman's name: Margaret, Linda, Rebecca. At least a dozen others she hadn't seen in the registry. Each folder contained the same horrifying contents: driver's licenses, pregnancy tests, ultrasound photos, and detailed notes in David's precise handwriting about their routines, their fears, their family situations. The final page in each folder was a death certificate, all citing accidental death or suicide during pregnancy-related depression. Sarah's folder was there too, already thick with information she had never known he was collecting. Photos of her apartment building, copies of her medical records, notes about her estranged relationship with her parents. At the bottom was a blank death certificate with her name already filled in. Car headlights suddenly swept across the lobby windows. Sarah slammed the filing cabinet shut and grabbed as many folders as she could carry. The engine sound grew louder, accompanied by the slam of a car door. Heavy footsteps splashed through puddles, approaching the hotel entrance. She had nowhere to run. The back exit was locked, and the windows were too high and narrow to crawl through in her condition. The only option was to hide and hope David would think she was asleep upstairs, buying her enough time to find another way out. As the front door's handle began to turn, Sarah dove behind the reception desk, clutching the evidence against her chest and praying her baby would stay quiet. The leather-bound registry fell from Maya's trembling hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud that echoed through the silent lobby. Her legs gave way, and she sank into the moth-eaten velvet chair behind her, one hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. David, her David, the man who brought her coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who had painted the nursery soft yellow because they wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender. The man who kissed her forehead every night and whispered how much he loved her. The same man whose handwriting she'd just seen documenting 3 other wives. Maya's breathing came in short, sharp gasps. She forced herself to pick up the registry again, though every fiber of her being screamed to run. Her eyes scanned the entries once more, hoping she'd misread, hoping this was some elaborate nightmare brought on by pregnancy hormones and exhaustion. But there it was. David Chen, married to Susan Holloway, June 15, 2019. David Chen, married to Rebecca Martinez, September 3, 2020. David Chen, married to Jennifer Walsh, February 14, 2022. And finally, David Chen, married to Maya Thompson, August 12, 2023. Valentine's Day. He'd married Jennifer on Valentine's Day while he was already married to 2 other women. Maya felt bile rise in her throat. The dates created a horrifying timeline, overlapping marriages, overlapping lives. While she'd been planning their wedding, believing she was the only woman in his life, he'd had 2 other wives. While Jennifer was saying her vows on that romantic February day, David was already contemplating his 4th marriage. Maya flipped through more pages with shaking fingers, searching for additional entries. What she found made her blood freeze. Jennifer Walsh's name appeared one more time, but this entry was different. It was written in red ink, and beside her name was a single word that made Maya's vision blur: disposed. The same red ink marked Rebecca Martinez's name. Only Susan Holloway's entry remained unmarked, along with Maya's own. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the ceiling above her head. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she listened. The storm continued to rage outside, but she could swear she heard something else now. A door creaking open somewhere in the building. She clutched the registry to her chest and forced herself to think. The car keys. She needed to get back to her car, storm or no storm. She couldn't stay here another second, not when this place clearly held such significance to David's horrible secret life. But first, she needed proof. Evidence that would make people believe her when she told them what kind of monster she'd married. Maya tore out the pages containing David's entries, her fingers working frantically to separate the aged paper. She folded them carefully and stuffed them into her jacket pocket, then closed the registry and placed it back where she'd found it. Another sound from upstairs, closer this time, like someone walking down a hallway. Moving as quietly as her pregnant body would allow, Maya made her way toward the front door. The wind howled through broken windows, and lightning illuminated the lobby in stark, terrifying flashes. Each crash of thunder seemed to shake the entire building. She reached for the door handle just as headlights swept across the front of the hotel. Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins. A car was pulling into the gravel lot, moving slowly through the storm. Through the grimy windows, she watched as the vehicle came to a stop next to her own car. The headlights died, leaving only darkness and the occasional flash of lightning to reveal the scene outside. A figure emerged from the car, tall, familiar silhouette that she knew as well as her own reflection. David. Panic flooded her system. How had he found her? How did he even know about this place? But even as the questions raced through her mind, she knew the answer. Of course he knew about this place. This was where he brought them, all of them. Maya backed away from the door, her mind spinning. She was trapped. The storm made it impossible to flee on foot, especially in her condition, and David was now blocking the only exit. The footsteps upstairs had stopped, but that somehow made things worse. Was there someone else here? Another victim? Or worse, was David not alone? She needed to hide. Needed to think. The lobby offered no concealment, and she couldn't risk being caught in the open. Maya spotted a doorway behind the reception desk, partially concealed by shadows. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, she made her way toward it, praying it led to somewhere she could hide until she figured out how to escape. Behind her, she heard the front door creak open. David's voice carried through the lobby, calling her name with the same gentle tone he'd used 1,000 times before, but now it sounded different. Now it sounded like death. The leather-bound registry felt cold against Sarah's trembling fingers as she opened it wider, revealing page after page of entries written in David's familiar handwriting. Each entry contained a woman's name, address, wedding date, and a chilling final column labeled resolution. Her eyes moved down the list, her heart hammering against her ribs. Margaret Chen, Seattle, WA. Married June 15, 2018. Resolution, October 2018. Anissa Rodriguez, Portland, or married March 3, 2019. Resolution, August 2019. Catherine Walsh, San Francisco, CA. Married November 12, 2019. Resolution, April 2020. The entries continued, a grotesque catalogue of lives David had touched and destroyed. Sarah's own name appeared near the bottom. And Sarah Mitchell, Denver Co., married September 7th, 2022. Resolution pending. Her stomach lurched, and she pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. The baby kicked as if sensing her distress, and she forced herself to breathe deeply. She needed to think clearly now, not fall apart. A loose photograph slipped from between the pages, fluttering to the dusty floor. Sarah bent to retrieve it and gasped. The image showed David standing beside a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, Margaret Chen, according to the registry. They were posed in front of what looked like a courthouse, both smiling. Margaret wore a simple white dress and held a bouquet of roses. Sarah flipped the photo over. In David's handwriting, "And my beautiful wife Margaret, our perfect day." The same words he'd whispered to her on their wedding day. Thunder crashed overhead, but Sarah barely noticed. She turned the pages frantically, searching for more photographs, more evidence of the monster she'd married. Tucked into the back cover, she found a folded newspaper clipping from the Seattle Times, dated October 15th, 2018. A local woman found dead in apparent hiking accident. Margaret Chen, 29, was discovered at the bottom of Eagle's Peak Ravine yesterday morning by fellow hikers. Chen, who had recently married, was an experienced hiker according to friends and family. Park rangers suspect she may have lost her footing during the recent heavy rains. An investigation is ongoing. Sarah's hands shook as she read. An accident. They'd called it an accident. She fumbled through more pages, finding similar clippings for Lisa Rodriguez, a drowning incident in the Columbia River, and Catherine Walsh, who had died in a suspicious house fire. Each death ruled accidental or inconclusive. Each wife erased from David's life when he was ready to move on. The sound of a car engine cut through the storm's roar, growing louder as it approached the hotel. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She slammed the registry shut and clutched it to her chest, her mind racing. The front entrance was the only way out she knew of, but whoever was arriving would see her immediately. Headlight beams swept across the lobby windows, casting moving shadows on the walls. Sarah dropped to her hands and knees behind the reception desk, the registry pressed against her swollen belly. The baby was restless now, as if picking up on her terror. A car door slammed, followed by footsteps on the gravel outside. Heavy boots, purposeful strides. The footsteps stopped at the front door, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of keys jingling. And he has keys. Of course he did. This was his place, his hunting ground. How many women had he brought here? How many had discovered the truth too late? The front door creaked open, and the footsteps entered the lobby. Sarah pressed herself lower against the floor, trying to make herself invisible. Through a gap in the desk's panels she could see boots, expensive hiking boots that she recognized. David's boots. Sarah. His voice was calm, almost gentle, the same tone he used when he brought her morning coffee or asked about her day. "Sarah, honey, are you in here?" She held her breath, her heart beating so loudly she was certain he could hear it. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly sharp kick, and Sarah bit her lip to keep from gasping. "I saw your car outside, sweetheart. I know you're scared, but we need to talk." His footsteps moved deeper into the lobby, measured and patient. "I can explain everything. It's not what you think." Sarah's mind raced. He was between her and the front door now. She needed another exit, but she'd barely explored the ground floor. There had to be a back entrance, a service door, something. "The storm's getting worse," David continued, his voice echoing off the empty walls. "It's dangerous out there. Come out, and we'll talk about this like reasonable adults." His footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear only the rain against the windows and her own ragged breathing. Then David spoke again, and this time his voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. "I know you found the registry, Sarah." The storm's fury seemed to match the chaos in Sarah's mind, as she clutched the registry to her chest, her other hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her terror. She had to move, had to get out of this nightmare before David returned, but her legs felt like lead. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the hotel's ancient windows. In the brief illumination of lightning, shadows danced across the walls like vengeful spirits. Sarah forced herself to take a shaky breath and think rationally. David had left hours ago, claiming he needed supplies from town. How long did she have before he came back? She flipped through more pages of the registry, her hands trembling. The entries went back years. Dozens of women, all with different last names, all marked as Mrs. David Chen or Mrs. David Morrison or Mrs. David Sullivan. The aliases made her stomach churn. How many identities did her husband have? How many lives had he destroyed? A loose photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Sarah bent awkwardly to retrieve it, her pregnancy making the movement difficult. When she saw the image, bile rose in her throat. It was David, but not the gentle, loving man she'd married. This David wore a cold smile as he stood beside a woman with terrified eyes. A woman Sarah recognized from the missing persons flyers she'd seen posted around town months ago. The woman had never been found. Sarah's breathing became rapid and shallow. She stumbled toward the window, desperate for air, but the storm outside offered no comfort. Rain lashed against the glass in torrential sheets, and the wind howled like something alive and hungry. Even if she could reach her car, the roads would be impassable in this weather. She was trapped. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the hotel's depths. Sarah froze, listening intently over the storm's roar. Had that been the building settling, or something else? Someone else? Another creak, definitely closer this time. Panic flooded her system. David was supposed to be gone for hours, but what if he'd come back early? What if he'd been watching her all along, waiting to see what she would discover? Sarah clutched the registry tighter and looked around frantically for somewhere to hide. The footsteps were unmistakable now, slow and deliberate, climbing the stairs toward the second floor. Sarah bit back a whimper and pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway. Maybe if she stayed perfectly still, whoever it was would pass by without checking this room. But deep down, she knew better. David was meticulous, calculating. If he'd returned early and seen signs of her snooping, he would check everywhere. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, and Sarah had to press her lips together to keep from gasping. She slid one hand over her belly, trying to soothe the child while her mind raced through impossible options. The fire escape outside the window might work, but it was old and rusted, and one wrong step could send her plummeting to the ground below. The closet offered no real concealment, just a few moth-eaten coats that wouldn't hide a pregnant woman. The footsteps paused directly outside her door. Sarah's heart hammered so violently she was certain it could be heard over the storm. She gripped the registry like a weapon, though she knew it would be useless against David's strength. The man she'd married worked construction. His hands that had once caressed her so tenderly were easily capable of snapping her neck. The door handle turned with agonizing slowness. Sarah closed her eyes and held her breath, pressing herself harder against the wall. The hinges groaned as the door swung open, and a figure stepped into the room. In the darkness, she could make out a familiar silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered. "Sarah?" David's voice was soft, concerned. "Honey, are you up here? I brought some supplies from town, and I saw you'd left the lobby." The loving tone made her skin crawl. How many other women had he spoken to with that same false tenderness? How many had trusted that voice right up until the moment he revealed his true nature? "I know you're here, sweetheart," David continued, moving further into the room. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, Sarah saw his profile clearly. The gentle expression she'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. "I can smell your perfume." He turned slowly, systematically scanning the shadows. When his gaze swept toward her hiding spot, Sarah squeezed her eyes shut like a child who believed invisibility came with not seeing. "There you are." Her eyes snapped open to find David standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. His smile was the same one from the photograph, empty of warmth, full of terrible promise. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his hand reaching toward her throat. The emergency exit door crashed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the stairwell like a gunshot. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, straining to listen for footsteps above. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, responding to her elevated pulse and the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had to keep moving. Michael knew the hotel's layout better than she did, and staying in one place meant certain capture. The stairwell stretched both up and down into darkness, lit only by the weak emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Going up would trap her on the higher floors. Down was her only option. Her bare feet made almost no sound on the concrete steps as she descended, one hand gripping the metal railing, the other supporting her belly. Each floor she passed had a number stenciled on the door, 876. The basement level would offer more hiding places, more exits. She hoped. The storm outside seemed to be intensifying. Even through the thick walls, she could hear the wind howling and rain lashing against the building. Lightning flashed through a small window on the fifth-floor landing, illuminating her face for a brief moment before plunging her back into shadow. At the third floor she heard it, the distant clang of a door opening somewhere above. Michael had found the stairwell. Her descent became more urgent, her breathing shallow and quick. The baby seemed to sense her distress, kicking hard against her ribs. "Not now," she whispered, placing both hands on her stomach. "Please, not now." The basement-level door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of pale light visible through the gap. Sarah pushed through carefully, emerging into a long corridor lined with utility rooms and storage areas. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something chemical and sharp that made her nose wrinkle. Pipes ran along the ceiling, occasionally dripping water that had pooled on the concrete floor. The lighting here was better than the stairwell, but still dim, creating pockets of deep shadow between each overhead fixture. She moved forward cautiously, testing each step to avoid the larger puddles that might splash and give away her position. Behind her, she heard the stairwell door slam open. Michael's voice carried down the corridor, no longer the gentle tone she remembered from their courtship. This voice was cold, controlled. She ducked into the first utility room she found, pressing herself against the wall beside the doorframe. The space was cramped, filled with old maintenance equipment and cleaning supplies. A water heater hummed in the corner, its pilot light casting dancing shadows on the walls. "You have to understand," Michael continued, his voice growing closer. "Each of them served a purpose. But you, Sarah, you're different. You're carrying my child. That makes you special." The way he said it made her skin crawl. She wasn't his wife. She was just another acquisition in whatever sick game he was playing. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Had he planned their meeting, their whirlwind romance? Had he been watching her, studying her before he made his move? His footsteps stopped directly outside her hiding place. Sarah held her breath, pressing one hand over her mouth to muffle any sound. Through the gap in the doorframe, she could see his shadow stretched across the corridor floor. "The first one fought too hard," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Such a waste. The second was more compliant, but she couldn't give me what I needed. Children, Sarah. Legacy. That's what this is about." A shadow moved past her door. Sarah waited until she could no longer hear his footsteps before emerging from her hiding spot. She had to find another way out of the basement. The main stairwell was compromised, but old hotels like this often had service elevators or secondary exits. She moved deeper into the basement, past a boiler room and what looked like an old laundry facility. At the far end of the corridor, she found what she was looking for, a freight elevator with accordion-style gates. "Please work," she prayed silently as she pressed the call button. The machinery groaned to life somewhere above, cables creaking as the elevator descended. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet basement. Behind her, she heard Michael's footsteps change direction, moving back toward her location. The elevator arrived with a mechanical thunk. Sarah yanked open the gates and stumbled inside, frantically pressing buttons. The ground floor button glowed weakly as the elevator began its slow ascent. Through the gates, she saw Michael round the corner at a run, his face a mask of fury she'd never seen before. He reached the elevator just as it cleared the basement level, his fingers grasping at empty air where she had been moments before. "You can't hide from me forever, Sarah," he called after her, his voice following her up through the shaft. "I always find what belongs to me." The basement stretched before Elena like a tomb, its concrete walls weeping with decades of accumulated moisture. Her phone's flashlight carved a narrow cone through the darkness, illuminating patches of mold and the skeletal remains of what had once been the hotel's mechanical systems. The musty air caught in her throat as she pressed forward, one hand trailing along the wall for balance while the other protected her swollen belly. Somewhere above, Michael's footsteps echoed through the corridors. He was methodical now, no longer calling her name with false tenderness. The mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath. She could hear him opening doors, searching room by room with the patience of someone who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Elena's foot struck something metallic, and she winced at the sharp clang that rang through the basement. She froze, listening for any change in the rhythm of his search above. The footsteps paused, and she held her breath until they resumed their steady pattern. The object at her feet was an old paint can, one of several scattered around what appeared to be a maintenance area. Shelves lined the walls, holding the detritus of the hotel's operational years. Rusted tools, empty chemical containers, coils of wire. Elena swept her light across the space, desperately seeking anything that might serve as a weapon, or, better yet, another way out. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a defunct water heater, she spotted a door. Unlike the polished wood and brass fixtures upstairs, this was pure utility, grey metal with a simple handle. As she approached, she could feel a subtle current of air flowing beneath it, fresh air. The handle turned with surprising ease, revealing a narrow concrete stairwell that angled upward. At the top, another door stood slightly ajar, allowing precious slivers of grey daylight to filter down. Elena's heart hammered with hope as she began to climb, moving as quietly as her pregnant body would allow. The stairs led to what had once been a service entrance behind the hotel. Weeds had grown up around the doorframe, and rust stained the metal, but the exit was real and functional. Elena pushed through into the storm, immediately soaked by the driving rain but grateful for the open space and multiple escape routes it offered. The parking lot stretched before her, a maze of abandoned vehicles in various states of decay. Her rental car sat where she'd left it, but Michael would expect her to head straight for it. Instead, she moved laterally, using the hulking remains of delivery trucks and rusted sedans as cover while she worked her way toward the tree line beyond the lot. A contraction seized her just as she ducked behind an overturned van, and she bit back a cry of pain. The stress was accelerating her labor. She could feel her body preparing itself regardless of the circumstances. 28 weeks was too early, far too early, but her daughter seemed determined to enter this nightmare world. When the pain subsided, Elena forced herself to continue moving. The woods represented her best chance of escape, even if they also meant exposure to the storm's full fury. She could follow the road back to town while remaining hidden in the trees, and once she reached civilization, Michael's carefully constructed life would crumble under scrutiny. She was halfway across the lot when she heard the basement door slam open behind her. Michael's voice cut through the storm, no longer the gentle tone she'd fallen in love with, but something raw and dangerous. "Elena, there's nowhere to go. The road's washed out, and you're in no condition to be wandering around in this weather." She pressed herself against the side of a rusted delivery truck, peering around its edge to see him standing in the service doorway. Even at this distance, she could see he held something in his hand, the tire iron from her car's emergency kit. The methodical husband she'd married was gone, replaced by something that had probably been lurking beneath the surface all along. "Think about the baby," he called, starting across the lot with measured steps. "I know you're scared, but we can work this out. All those other women, they didn't understand what we had. They couldn't give me what you can." Elena fought down a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. The registry's implications crashed over her again, not just multiple wives, but what had happened to them when they'd outlived their usefulness, when they'd learned too much or asked too many questions. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time, and she knew she was running out of time in more ways than one. The tree line was still 50 yards away, and Michael was closing the distance between them with every second. She needed a distraction, something to buy her the time to reach the woods. Her fingers closed around a chunk of concrete that had broken off from the building's foundation. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. The service elevator lurched to a stop on the 4th floor with a mechanical groan that seemed to echo through every bone in Sarah's body. She pressed herself against the cold metal wall, listening for any sound that might indicate Marcus had discovered her escape route. The silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the storm's relentless assault on the building's exterior. She forced the doors open just wide enough to slip through, emerging into a corridor that felt different from the floors below. The wallpaper here hung in long, tattered strips, and debris littered the carpet. This level had been abandoned longer than the others, left to rot in the hotel's gradual decay. Sarah moved carefully, testing each floorboard before putting her full weight down. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her mounting desperation. She needed to find another stairwell, another way down that Marcus wouldn't think to check. The registry was still clutched against her chest, evidence of his crimes that she had to preserve. A door stood ajar at the end of the hallway, revealing what had once been a housekeeping station. Sarah slipped inside, hoping to find a service map or anything that might show her another route out of this nightmare. Instead, she found something that made her blood freeze. Scattered across a metal desk were photographs, dozens of them, all women, all young, all bearing the same terrified expression she now knew must be etched on her own face. Her hands trembled as she picked up the closest photo. The woman was brunette, probably in her early 20s, with kind eyes that seemed to plead through the image. Sarah recognized the background. It was one of the hotel rooms downstairs. Written on the back in Marcus's familiar handwriting were the words, "Emma, wife 3rd, disposed of properly." The next photo showed a redhead with a bright smile that had been captured before she learned the truth. Jennifer, wife 5th, too curious for her own good. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into a mouldy chair, the registry sliding from her lap to the floor. The photographs kept coming, each one a testament to Marcus's methodical madness. How many women had he murdered? How many had stood in this very building, realizing too late what kind of monster they had married? She thought of the fresh grave she had glimpsed through the window, the one that had been covered so hastily. Someone else had discovered his secret. Someone else had tried to run. A sound from the corridor outside made her freeze. Footsteps, slow, measured, searching. Marcus had found the service elevator. "Sarah?" His voice carried a sing-song quality that made her skin crawl. "I know you're up here somewhere, sweetheart. You're only making this harder on yourself." She grabbed as many photographs as she could stuff into her jacket pockets, then carefully lifted the registry. These women deserved justice, deserved to be remembered as more than just Marcus's victims. She owed them that much. The footsteps were getting closer. Sarah looked around desperately and spotted a maintenance ladder mounted to the wall, leading up to what appeared to be roof access. It was her only option. Climbing with the registry proved nearly impossible. Each rung sent shooting pains through her back, and the baby seemed to press against her lungs, making every breath a struggle. But terror provided its own strength, and she forced herself upward, one agonizing step at a time. The roof access door was rusted shut, but adrenaline gave her the leverage she needed to force it open. Rain immediately soaked through her clothes as she emerged onto the hotel's flat roof. The storm had intensified, turning the world into a grey-black maelstrom of wind and water. Sarah stumbled across the rooftop, looking for fire escapes, for any way down that didn't lead back through Marcus's hunting ground. The registry's pages fluttered in the wind, threatening to tear away, but she held tight. This evidence was the only thing that might save her and ensure that the women in those photographs hadn't died for nothing. Below her, she could see Marcus's truck parked near the hotel's main entrance. If she could somehow get to it, if she could find his keys. The roof access door slammed open behind her. "There you are." Marcus stepped out into the storm, no longer bothering with his charming facade. His face was hard, predatory, lit by flashes of lightning. "You've been very naughty, Sarah. Very, very naughty." She backed toward the roof's edge, the registry pressed protectively against her stomach. Below was a 40-foot drop to concrete and certain death. Behind her was a man who had murdered at least 6 women, probably more. "The photographs," she gasped. "I saw them all. I know what you are." Marcus smiled, rain streaming down his face like tears. "Yes, you do. And that's exactly why you can't leave this place alive." Lightning split the sky, illuminating his advancing form as Sarah realized she had run out of places to hide. The service elevator groaned to life, its ancient machinery protesting as Sarah pressed the basement button with trembling fingers. The car lurched downward through darkness, each floor passing like a countdown to either salvation or doom. She clutched the emergency phone she'd found in the manager's office, its battery showing only 2 bars, and tried to steady her breathing. The basement smelled of mildew and decay. Emergency lighting cast sickly shadows across concrete walls lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Sarah followed the building schematics she'd memorized, searching for the maintenance tunnel that connected to the neighboring office complex. Her footsteps echoed in the confined space, each sound amplified and returned to her like whispered warnings. Behind a wall of cleaning supplies and broken furniture, she found the access door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The handle turned easily, too easily. Fresh oil gleamed on the hinges. Someone had been maintaining this route. The tunnel stretched ahead into blackness, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Sarah activated the phone's flashlight function, knowing it would drain the precious battery but having no choice. The concrete walls were smooth, recently cleaned. This wasn't an abandoned passage. Halfway through the tunnel, she heard them. Voices echoing from behind, distorted by the acoustics, but unmistakably getting closer. David's voice rose above the others, calm and methodical as always. "She's resourceful, but there are only so many places to go. Marcus, take the stairwell. Jenny, check the upper floors again. I'll handle the basement." Sarah's blood turned to ice. He was coming this way, following the same logic that had led her here. She quickened her pace, the flashlight beam dancing wildly across the tunnel walls. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing her panic. The tunnel seemed endless. Her legs burned, and the extra weight she carried made each step an effort. Behind her, the voices grew closer. A new beam of light appeared in the distance, David's flashlight cutting through the darkness like a predator's eye. Finally, she reached the far end. The exit door stood before her, solid metal with a push-bar handle. Sarah threw her weight against it and stumbled into another basement, this one filled with modern HVAC equipment and the hum of active machinery. She was in the office building next door. The stairs to the parking garage were clearly marked. Sarah climbed them 2 at a time, her heart hammering against her chest. The garage was dimly lit but felt like paradise after the tunnel's oppressive darkness. Rows of cars sat empty in the late-night silence. She needed transportation. Sarah moved between the vehicles, checking door handles and looking for any sign of careless owners who might have left keys behind. Most cars were locked tight, their windows dark and unwelcoming. Then she saw it. A maintenance van parked near the service bay, its door slightly ajar. The logo on the side read Premier Property Management. Sarah approached cautiously, listening for any sound of pursuit from the tunnel entrance behind her. The van's cab was unlocked, keys dangling from the ignition. A small miracle, or perhaps maintenance workers felt safe in this secured garage. Sarah didn't question her luck. She climbed behind the wheel, adjusted the seat to accommodate her pregnancy, and turned the key. The engine coughed to life with a reassuring rumble. Sarah put the van in gear and drove toward the exit ramp, forcing herself to maintain a normal speed despite every instinct screaming at her to floor the accelerator. The parking garage's automated gate rose smoothly as she approached, sensors detecting the vehicle's presence. Rain still fell in sheets outside, but it felt like freedom washing over her. Sarah pulled onto the empty street and drove several blocks before allowing herself to believe she might actually escape. The city stretched ahead, anonymous and protective in its vastness. She needed help, but not from local police. David's influence might extend that far, and she'd learned not to underestimate his reach. Instead, she thought of her sister Rachel, living 3 states away in Denver. Rachel had always been the strong one, the one who asked hard questions and didn't accept easy answers. Sarah pulled into an all-night gas station, parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, and dialed Rachel's number on the emergency phone. It rang 4 times before her sister's groggy voice answered. "Hello? Who is this?" "Rachel, it's Sarah. I need help. I'm in trouble, and I need somewhere safe to go." The line went quiet except for the sound of Rachel sitting up in bed. When she spoke again, her voice was alert and focused. "Where are you? What kind of trouble?" "I can't explain over the phone. Can you wire me money for a bus ticket? I need to get to Denver tonight." "Sarah, you're scaring me. What about David? What about the baby?" Sarah watched the rain streak down the windshield, distorting the world beyond into abstract patterns of light and shadow. "David is the trouble, Rachel. I'll explain everything when I see you." The basement stairs creaked under Sarah's weight as she descended into the musty darkness, her flashlight beam cutting through shadows that seemed to writhe and dance. The registry clutched in her free hand felt like evidence of a crime she was only beginning to understand. Each step downward brought a fresh wave of that sickly sweet smell she'd noticed earlier, now so strong it made her stomach lurch. At the bottom of the stairs, her light revealed a long corridor lined with storage rooms. The concrete floor was stained with dark patches that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she noticed drag marks leading from the stairwell toward the far end of the hallway. She forced herself to follow the trail, though every instinct screamed at her to run. The first storage room door stood slightly ajar, and when she pushed it open, the smell hit her like a physical blow. Inside, scattered among old hotel furniture and moldy linens, were personal belongings clearly left behind by women who had stayed here. A purse with its contents spilled across the floor, a wedding ring glinting in her flashlight beam, a photograph of a young woman smiling beside a man whose face had been deliberately scratched out. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the photograph. Even with the face destroyed, she recognized the build, the stance. David, or whoever he really was. A sound from deeper in the basement made her freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward her location. Sarah quickly switched off her flashlight and pressed herself against the storage room wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the scrape of something being dragged across the concrete. Through the crack in the door, she could see a dim light bobbing in the darkness. Someone was coming down the corridor, heading directly toward her hiding spot. Sarah held her breath as the figure passed by her doorway. In the brief moment of illumination, she caught a glimpse of a man's profile, but it wasn't David. This person was shorter, stockier, with graying hair and rough clothing. An accomplice. The realization that David wasn't working alone sent ice through her veins. The man continued past her room toward the end of the corridor, where he began working on something that produced rhythmic, scraping sounds. Sarah waited until the noises grew distant before switching her flashlight back on and creeping toward the doorway. She had to know what was happening down here. even as her mind recoiled from the possibilities. Moving as silently as possible, she made her way down the corridor toward the sounds. The basement opened into a larger room at the end, and Sarah could see light spilling out from it. She approached the doorway with extreme caution, then peered around the corner. What she saw made her clap a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The room had been converted into a workshop of sorts, with tools hanging on pegboards and several large freezers humming against one wall. The man she'd seen was working methodically, his back to her, preparing what looked like a burial shroud. On a metal table nearby lay items that had clearly been taken from the storage rooms upstairs: jewelry, identification cards, personal effects. But it was the wall display that truly horrified her. Photographs of women were pinned in neat rows, each with details written beneath in David's familiar handwriting: names, dates, physical descriptions. Some photos had red X's marked across them. Sarah recognized several faces from the registry upstairs, including the woman from the photograph she'd found. Her own wedding photo was pinned in the bottom row, still unmarked but clearly designated for the same fate as the others. Sarah backed away from the doorway, her mind reeling. This wasn't just bigamy or fraud, it was systematic murder. David had been luring women to this place, marrying them for whatever resources they possessed, then disposing of them when they'd served their purpose. And now she was carrying his child, which made her either more valuable to him or more dangerous, depending on his twisted logic. The man in the workshop suddenly stopped his activities and turned toward the doorway. Sarah realized with horror that her flashlight beam must have given her away. Their eyes met across the room, and for a frozen moment, neither moved. Then he lunged toward her with surprising speed for his build, and Sarah ran. She sprinted down the corridor, her flashlight beam wild and erratic as she fled toward the stairs. Behind her, she could hear him shouting, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. The sound of pursuit drove her forward even as her pregnant body protested the sudden exertion. Sarah reached the stairs and took them two at a time, bursting through the basement door into the hotel's main floor. She could hear him climbing behind her, his heavy footsteps gaining ground. The front entrance seemed impossibly far away, and she knew that running into the storm while pregnant would be its own kind of death sentence. But staying meant certain death at the hands of these monsters who had turned the abandoned hotel into their personal hunting ground. The electrical room hummed with an ominous energy as Sarah crouched behind the massive generator, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the maze of pipes and machinery, she could hear David's footsteps echoing in the basement corridor, methodical and patient. He was hunting her, and they both knew she was trapped. "Sarah, darling," his voice drifted through the mechanical symphony, sickeningly gentle. "This is exhausting for both of us. Think about the baby." She pressed her hand to her swollen belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of movement within. The baby was her strength now, her reason to survive this nightmare. She had to get out of this basement, out of this cursed hotel, and expose David for what he truly was. The beam of his flashlight swept past her hiding spot, casting dancing shadows on the concrete walls. Sarah held her breath until the light moved on, then carefully shifted position. Her ankle throbbed from her earlier fall, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. She needed to find another way out of this room. "You know, I really did love you," David continued, his voice closer now. "You were different from the others, smarter, more resourceful. I actually convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, you could be the one I'd keep." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The casual way he spoke about the other women, about keeping her like some sort of prize, made her stomach churn. She spotted a service ladder leading to what looked like a ventilation shaft near the ceiling. If she could reach it without making noise, she might have a chance. "But you just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" David's tone hardened, snooping around, finding that registry. "Do you have any idea how much work it took to establish all those identities, all those careful relationships?" Sarah began inching toward the ladder, using the generator's noise to mask her movement. Each step was agony as she fought to keep her breathing steady and silent. The metal rungs looked old and potentially rusty, but it was her only option. Margaret was the first, you know. David's voice carried a note of nostalgia that made Sarah's skin crawl. Sweet, trusting Margaret. She actually believed I was a traveling businessman, made it so easy to disappear for weeks at a time, establishing new lives in new cities. Sarah reached the base of the ladder and looked up. The shaft opening was about 15 feet above her, and she could feel a slight airflow suggesting it led somewhere other than this underground tomb. She grasped the first rung, testing its strength. Lisa was more suspicious, David continued, apparently enjoying his monologue. She hired a private investigator. Can you imagine? I had to accelerate my timeline with her. Such a shame. She was quite beautiful. The ladder held Sarah's weight, though it creaked ominously. She began climbing, each rung a small victory. Below, David's footsteps had stopped. Had he heard something? Elena thought she was clever too, he said, his voice now stationary. She found some of my documents, started asking questions. They all think they're so smart, but they never see the bigger picture. Sarah was halfway up the ladder when her foot slipped slightly, causing a small scraping sound against the metal. She froze, not daring to breathe. What was that? David's voice was sharp, alert. The beam of his flashlight began sweeping more frantically around the room. Sarah pressed herself against the ladder, hoping the shadows would conceal her. The ventilation shaft was still several feet above her, but she was completely exposed on the ladder. Moving now would certainly give away her position, but staying put meant eventual discovery. "You can't hide forever, Sarah," David called out. "This basement only has so many places to conceal someone in your condition, and frankly, all this stress can't be good for the baby." The mockery in his voice when he mentioned their child filled Sarah with a rage that overcame her fear. This monster, this killer who had deceived her so completely, was threatening not just her life but their babies. She resumed climbing, no longer caring about the noise. David's flashlight beam found her immediately. "There you are," he said with satisfaction. "Come down from there, Sarah. Let's discuss this like civilized people." Sarah looked down to see him standing directly below her, his face upturned and wearing that same charming smile that had once made her fall in love with him. But now she could see the coldness in his eyes, the calculated patience of a predator. "No," she said firmly, continuing her climb. "I'm not coming down, David, or whatever your real name is." "Michael," he said conversationally. "My name is Michael, has been all along. David was just for you." Sarah reached the ventilation opening and hauled herself inside the narrow shaft. Behind her, she heard David beginning to climb the ladder, his movements quick and confident. The shaft stretched ahead into darkness, but it was her only path to freedom. The basement stretched endlessly before Sarah, a maze of crumbling concrete and rusted pipes that groaned with each gust of wind above. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing scattered debris and the occasional scurrying shadow of something she preferred not to identify. The baby pressed against her ribs, a constant reminder that she was carrying more than just herself through this nightmare. She had been down here for what felt like hours, following the building's blueprints she'd found in the manager's office. There had to be another way out. Old hotels like this always had service tunnels, delivery entrances, something the architects built for discretion. The wealthy guests who once frequented this place wouldn't have wanted to see the staff coming and going through the main lobby. A distant sound made her freeze, footsteps, deliberate and measured, echoing from somewhere above. Marcus was methodical in his search, checking each room with the patience of someone who knew his prey had nowhere to run. But he didn't know about the basement entrance she'd found behind the kitchen's industrial freezer, or that she'd been studying the building's layout while he assumed she was cowering in fear. The tunnel she followed now sloped downward, leading away from the hotel's foundation. Her fingers traced the wall, feeling the transition from concrete blocks to older stonework. This section predated the hotel, perhaps part of the original estate that had stood here decades ago. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of earth and old water. Her phone buzzed against her chest. A text message, though she had no signal bars showing. Emergency services sometimes pushed through when regular networks failed. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "I know where you are, Sarah. This is getting tiresome. Think about our child." The message was from Marcus. Her blood turned to ice as she realized he must have some kind of signal booster, or perhaps he was using the hotel's old communication system. She powered off the phone immediately, but the damage was done. If he could send messages, he might be able to track her location. The tunnel curved sharply to the right, and suddenly her flashlight illuminated something that made her gasp. A heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, stood partially ajar. Beyond it lay a small chamber carved directly into the hillside. But it wasn't empty. Makeshift beds lined one wall, their thin mattresses stained and rotting. Chains hung from iron rings bolted into the stone walls. In the corner, a plastic bucket sat next to a collection of women's clothing, different sizes, different styles, spanning what looked like years of accumulation. This wasn't just where Marcus brought his victims. This was where he kept them. Sarah's knees nearly buckled as the full horror of her situation crystallized. The hotel wasn't just his hunting ground, it was his base of operations. How many women had he lured here over the years? How many had died in this underground tomb while believing they were married to a loving husband? She forced herself to move deeper into the chamber, looking for anything that might help her escape. In the far corner, nearly hidden behind a pile of moldy blankets, she found a small grate set low in the wall. Air moved through it, carrying the clean scent of the outside world. It was barely large enough for a person to crawl through, but with her pregnancy, she wasn't sure she could fit. Behind her, a sound echoed through the tunnel, the scrape of the wooden door being pushed open wider. He had found her trail. "Sarah." Marcus's voice carried through the darkness, no longer the gentle tone she remembered from their courtship. Now it held the cold authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I can smell your fear. It's over now. Come out and we'll talk about this reasonably." She dropped to her knees beside the grate, pulling at the rusted screws that held it in place. Her fingers bled as she worked, but two of the screws came loose. The grate shifted slightly, revealing a narrow drainage pipe that led upward into blackness. "You know, Jessica tried to run too," Marcus called out, his voice closer now. "And Patricia. They both ended up right back here eventually. This is where you belong, Sarah, where our family begins." The third screw came free just as his flashlight beam swept across the chamber's entrance. Sarah squeezed into the pipe, her belly barely fitting through the opening. The metal was slick with condensation and decades of accumulated grime, but she pulled herself forward with desperate strength. Behind her, she heard Marcus's curse of rage echo through the chamber. His light played across the walls, searching for where she had gone. She crawled faster, ignoring the way the pipe's edges scraped against her back and arms. Somewhere above her lay freedom, if she could reach it before he found another way to cut off her escape. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if urging her onward. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hotel's skeletal frame, each step deliberate and measured. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the collapsed reception desk, her hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. Through the broken windows, she could see the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the overgrown courtyard. Marcus was methodical in his search, just as he had been methodical in building his web of lies. She thought of the registry she'd discovered, the names of women who had come before her, women who had loved him, trusted him, and disappeared without a trace. The front door creaked open, its hinges protesting after years of neglect. Sarah held her breath as the flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the lobby, illuminating patches of peeling wallpaper and water-stained carpet. She could hear him breathing, steady and controlled, the sound of a predator confident in his hunt. "Sarah!" his voice called out, tender and concerned, the same tone he'd used when she was sick with morning sickness, when he'd brought her tea and rubbed her feet. "I know you're frightened, sweetheart. This place isn't safe for you and the baby. Let me help you." The lies came so easily to him, wrapped in familiar endearments that had once made her feel cherished. Now they made her skin crawl. She shifted her weight carefully, trying to ease the pressure on her aching back without making a sound. The baby was due any day now, and her body felt heavy and unwieldy. Marcus's footsteps moved deeper into the hotel, toward the dining room where she'd first found evidence of his other life. Sarah used the opportunity to creep toward the service corridor she'd spotted earlier, a narrow passage that connected to the kitchen. If she could reach the back exit, she might have a chance. But as she rounded the corner, her foot caught on a piece of debris. The crash of broken glass seemed to echo through the entire building, shattering the silence like a gunshot. She froze, knowing it was too late for stealth now. "There you are," Marcus said, his voice coming from directly behind her. "You really shouldn't be wandering around in your condition." Sarah turned slowly to face him, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the dim light filtering through the broken ceiling, she could barely make out his features, but his silhouette was unmistakably familiar. The man she'd shared a bed with, planned a future with, created a life with. "How many were there?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "How many women before me?" Marcus tilted his head, studying her with what might have been admiration. "You found my collection. I have to admit I'm impressed. Most of them never put the pieces together." The casual way he spoke about it, as if discussing the weather, sent ice through her veins. "Where are they now?" "Elena, Patricia, Jennifer. What happened to them?" "They served their purpose," he said simply. "Just as you have." A contraction seized her abdomen without warning, sharp and intense. Sarah gasped, doubling over as pain radiated through her lower back. The stress and exhaustion of the day were taking their toll, and her body was responding in the worst possible moment. Marcus stepped closer, his flashlight beam moving to illuminate her face. "The baby's coming, isn't it? That's perfect timing, actually. I was hoping to be here for the birth." "Stay away from me," Sarah managed between gritted teeth, but the contraction was passing, leaving her breathless and shaky. "You know I can't do that," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket. The metallic glint of a knife blade caught the light. "You've seen too much. But don't worry, I'll take good care of our child. I've always wanted to be a father." Sarah's mind raced through her limited options. The back exit was only 20 feet away, but she'd never make it before he caught her. The service elevator to her left was broken, its doors hanging open like a gaping mouth. But perhaps another contraction hit, stronger this time, and she didn't have to fake the cry of pain that escaped her lips. As Marcus moved forward, concerned despite his murderous intentions, Sarah grabbed a chunk of concrete from the debris pile beside her and hurled it toward the windows at the far end of the corridor. The crash was tremendous, echoing through multiple rooms. Marcus spun toward the sound, and in that split second of distraction, Sarah lunged toward the elevator shaft. The doors were wide enough for her to slip through, and she could see rusted emergency ladder rungs built into the wall. "Sarah, no!" Marcus shouted. But she was already inside the shaft, gripping the ladder with trembling hands. Looking down into the darkness below, she realized she was gambling not just with her own life, but with her unborn child's. Another contraction was building, and she could feel her strength beginning to ebb. But above her, Marcus's flashlight beam was already probing the shaft, and she knew she had to keep moving. The generator's hum died with a mechanical wheeze, plunging the hotel into absolute darkness. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the basement wall, David's footsteps echoing somewhere above her. The flashlight's beam had died with the power, leaving her blind and trapped. "Sarah, darling, I know you're down there." His voice drifted through the floorboards, sickeningly sweet. "There's nowhere to run now. The storm's getting worse, and you're carrying my child. Let me take care of you both." She bit back a sob, one hand instinctively protecting her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her terror. Moving by touch alone, she felt along the concrete wall, searching for anything that might help her escape. Her fingers found rough stone, rusted pipes, and then a door handle. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing another passage. She couldn't see where it led, but staying put meant certain death. Sarah eased through the doorway, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. Behind her, she heard the basement door open, followed by the click of a flashlight. "Playing hide-and-seek, are we?" David's voice was closer now, echoing through the basement. "I always loved games, Sarah, but I always win." The narrow passage forced her to move sideways, her pregnant belly scraping against the walls. Pipes ran overhead, dripping condensation that fell like tears onto her shoulders. The air grew thicker, mustier, carrying the scent of decay and forgotten years. A thin line of grey light appeared ahead, another way out. As she approached, she realized it was a storm cellar entrance, its wooden doors slightly ajar. Rain poured through the gap, but it represented freedom. She pushed against the heavy doors, her weakened state making the task nearly impossible. "Found your little rabbit hole," David called from behind her. His flashlight beam swept the passage, growing brighter with each second. "You can't outrun me, Sarah, not in your condition." With a surge of desperate strength, she forced the cellar doors open. Wind and rain lashed her face as she emerged into the storm's fury. The hotel loomed behind her, its broken windows like dead eyes staring into the night. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the overgrown grounds and the forest beyond. She ran toward the trees, her feet slipping on the muddy ground. Branches whipped at her face and arms, but she pressed on, driven by pure survival instinct. The baby's weight threw off her balance, and she stumbled repeatedly, catching herself on tree trunks and rocks. Behind her, the cellar doors banged open. "Sarah, you'll hurt the baby!" David's voice carried over the storm, filled with false concern. "Come back inside where it's safe." Safe. The word was a mockery. She'd felt safe with him once, had loved him, planned a life with him. Now she knew the truth. She was just another name in his collection, another woman to be used and discarded when he grew bored. The forest was a maze of shadows and obstacles. Her nightgown clung to her body, soaked through and heavy. She could hear David crashing through the undergrowth behind her, his flashlight beam dancing between the trees. He was gaining ground. A fallen log blocked her path. As she climbed over it, her foot caught in a tangle of roots, sending her sprawling into the mud. Pain shot through her ankle, and for a terrifying moment, she felt a cramp in her abdomen. The baby. She had to protect the baby. "There you are." David emerged from the trees, his hair plastered to his skull, eyes wild in the flashlight's glow. "Look what you've done to yourself. You're bleeding, Sarah. You need medical attention." She looked down and saw blood on her arms where branches had torn her skin. Her ankle throbbed, possibly sprained, but the cramping had stopped. The baby was still safe. "Stay away from me." She struggled to stand, using a nearby tree for support. "I know what you did to them, to all of them." "What I did?" David took a step closer, his voice taking on that familiar patronizing tone. "I loved them, just like I love you, just like I love our child. You killed them." "I freed them." His face contorted with something that might have been grief or madness. "They were going to leave me, Sarah. They all threatened to leave, to take my children away. I couldn't let that happen." Lightning illuminated his face, and she saw the truth written there, the complete absence of sanity, of any recognition that what he'd done was wrong. He genuinely believed he was protecting his family, preserving it in the only way he knew how. "I won't leave," she lied, backing away slowly. "We can work this out, David. Go back to the hotel, get warm, talk about this rationally." He smiled, the expression chilling in its normality. "You're lying, darling, but that's all right. You'll understand soon enough." The flashlight beam wavered as he raised something else, a knife, its blade gleaming in the storm. The floorboards groaned beneath Sarah's feet as she crept through the hotel's main corridor, clutching the blood-stained registry against her chest. Every shadow seemed to breathe with menace, every creak of the old building making her heart hammer against her ribs. The storm had finally begun to subside, but she knew Marcus would return soon. She had to reach her car before then. Behind her, she heard the distant sound of a door slamming. Her blood turned to ice. He was back. "Sarah." His voice echoed through the abandoned halls, sickeningly sweet and concerned. "Where are you, darling? I brought medical supplies. The baby—" She pressed herself against the peeling wallpaper, forcing her breathing to slow. The baby kicked frantically inside her, as if sensing the danger. Through the grimy windows, the first hints of dawn were breaking through the dissipating storm clouds. "I know you're scared," Marcus continued, his footsteps deliberate and measured. "But you don't understand. Everything I did was for us, for our future." Sarah bit back a sob. She could hear him moving methodically through the rooms, searching. The front entrance was too risky. He'd see her immediately. But she remembered glimpsing a service exit near the old kitchen when she'd first explored the building. If she could reach it. She slipped off her shoes and began moving barefoot across the rotting carpet, wincing as broken glass bit into her soles. The registry felt impossibly heavy in her arms, but she couldn't abandon it. It was evidence, proof of what he'd done to Catherine, to Melissa, to all the others. "You found my collection, didn't you?" His voice was closer now, coming from the second floor. "I suppose I should have hidden it better. But I'm proud of my work, Sarah. Each one of them was practice, learning, perfecting my technique for someone truly special." The kitchen door appeared ahead of her, hanging askew on its hinges. Sarah slipped through, immediately hit by the stench of mold and decay. Rusted pots and pans lay scattered across moldy countertops. She picked her way carefully toward the service exit, praying it wouldn't be locked or boarded shut. "The first few were clumsy," Marcus called out, his voice echoing strangely through the building. "Catherine fought too hard. Melissa tried to run just like you're doing now, but I learned from each mistake. By the time I found you, I was ready." The service door was chained shut, but the chain was old and rusted. Sarah grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the counter and began striking the lock. The metal rang out with each blow, far too loud in the morning stillness. "There you are." She spun around to find Marcus standing in the kitchen doorway, no longer bothering to maintain his gentle facade. His clothes were muddy and torn, his face a mask of cold fury. In his hand, he held a long hunting knife. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, stepping into the room. "I had it all planned out. A tragic accident during the storm, mother and child lost together. So romantic, don't you think?" Sarah raised the skillet defensively. "Stay back. I know what you are, what you've done." He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "What I am is an artist, Sarah, and you're going to be my masterpiece." He lunged forward, knife gleaming. Sarah swung the skillet with desperate strength, connecting with his wrist. The knife clattered away across the floor as Marcus howled in pain and rage. She didn't wait to see how badly she'd hurt him. She turned back to the door and struck the lock again. This time it shattered. She burst through the exit into the pale morning light, still clutching the registry. A car sat in the muddy parking area, looking impossibly far away. Behind her she could hear Marcus cursing as he searched for his weapon. Her bare feet slipped in the mud as she ran, her pregnant belly throwing off her balance. The keys. Where were her keys? She fumbled through her pockets as she reached the car, finally finding them just as the service door exploded open behind her. Marcus emerged, blood streaming from his injured wrist, his face contorted with rage. "You can't escape me, Sarah. I'll find you. I'll find our child. You belong to me." She jammed the key into the ignition as he started across the parking area. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Sarah threw the car in reverse and floored the accelerator, sending mud and gravel spraying. In her rearview mirror, she saw Marcus standing in the growing dawn light, becoming smaller and smaller until the abandoned hotel disappeared behind the trees. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. The registry lay open beside her on the passenger seat, pages fluttering in the wind from her broken window. Evidence, justice for Catherine, for Melissa, for all of them. She drove toward the distant glow of the town, toward safety, toward a new beginning for herself and her child. The storm was over.